Hey everybody, and welcome to the Jump Ball Podcast. I'm your host, Mo Dakhil, and today my guest is Alykhan Bijani. He's a writer at The Athletic. He covers the Houston Rockets, and today we're going to talk about the Texas Triangles. That's right, we're going to hit the Rockets, the Spurs, the Mavs. We're going to get into all that stuff. And before we get started, actually, when we get to the Mavs, just because all the news is out there with Porzingis, I just want to say we're not going to talk about those allegations because, to be honest, we just don't have enough information to really talk about it in any way to make sense of it, credible, or even be at any point responsible to either party. So when we do talk about the Mavs, we're just going to talk about it as if the plan is for Porzingis to be there next year when he's healthy and all of that stuff. So with all that said, please take a second to pause the podcast, rate, review. I'm assuming you've already subscribed. If you haven't, subscribe, but those always help me out. So we're ready to tip it off. Ali, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm good. It's kind of weird. I just slipped right into Ali and didn't go Ali Khan. Is that?
No, that's honestly probably how most guys refer me to as, even players. It's pretty much Ali. I guess when they see the full name, they kind of like, oh my God, all right, I do not want to butcher this kid's name. How do I say that's correct? But nah, Ali is very easy to say. So I just like to say, just call me like the boxer, Muhammad Ali. Just call me Ali. Very simple.
That's simple, right? And I'm Muhammad, so we got Muhammad Ali on the podcast. That's what we got. It's the same way with me. With Muhammad, everybody goes straight to Mo, so it's not a.
No, I mean, some of my best friends who are named Muhammad, I go as Mo as well. I think it's just more so like
it's easy.
Simple, easy, and it's fun to say.
It's really easy. So I'm going to let you pick. Which team do you want to start out with first, between Houston, San Antonio, or Dallas?
Oof. All three are going through some interesting things right now, even especially in the second half of the season. I say let's start off with the team that's kind of struggling right now in San Antonio, and I know you spent a good amount of time there, and so I kind of want to talk to you about that because I'm surprised. 5 of the last 6 games, they're letting opponents shoot 110. I mean, they're scoring 110 points on the Spurs. I mean, the Spurs have a really good defense, and I've seen it firsthand. They are phenomenal. They're always in sync. Communication's great, but I don't know what's going on in the last 6 games. I don't know if that's more so to do with the offense struggling, they're not making their threes as much, or just simply that teams are starting to figure them out defensively, which is not a good sign as we hit the postseason.
Yeah, I think. Well, we saw it at the start of the season, right? They were terrible defensively to start the season, and everybody was really concerned about their defense and what's happening. And then they've hit a skid. The loss against the Rockets. Well, we understand the Rockets are a better team. They should, the Rockets are going to win that game. Losing to the Hornets was a bad loss. Losing to the Kings. The Kings, they're a feisty young group. It's possible. But the thing is, like you said, I think teams are slowly starting to figure it out, where to attack, when to attack. But at the end of the day, for me too, I just think we're seeing weird outcomes as we're heading towards the end of the season because everybody's just let's just get to the playoffs kind of thing. So I'm not sure really where we're at. I mean, like I had them dead after the rodeo trip. I don't know about you, where they went, I think like 1-8 in that trip, and I was just like, oh wow. That's usually the trip where they start to turn it on, and they really struggled there in that one. But then they reeled off 9 straight and got back into the kind of the playoff race, and now they're in it. So it's going to be an interesting thing. But for me, I just don't think I'm not too worried just because I think come playoff time they're kind of a team. Like if I'm Denver, I don't think I want to play the Spurs.
Yeah.
I think they're a kind of team that can figure you out, can give you problems. DeRozan can get going. We know he doesn't have a great track record in the playoffs thanks to what we know about Toronto, but LaMarcus Aldridge can get hot, and we've seen him. He can put up 50 at any point. It's one of those things. They get hot shooting, and then everything kind of just stems from that. Derek White's been phenomenal for them this year, and that's been a revelation. And for them, they're kind of playing with the house's money. Just because, the whole thing was, this would have been a very different team, I think, if DeJounte Murray was healthy. The way they were talking about him, it seemed like he was ready to make that leap to that next level for a young player, and they were pretty excited. So for them, just to be even in the playoffs, I think is is a huge plus for them. But what's your take on them?
Man, first I want to say this about Denver. I don't think Denver wants to face anybody in the playoffs. I mean, what I just saw, I watched them against Houston, and oh my goodness, James Harden was just picking them apart. They tried to hedge them, they tried to force him right. This was the first time I think all season where they implemented the game plan, forcing him right. But he attacked Paul Millsap easily, got inside, scored. I mean, I just don't know what to think of this Denver team. They would be good against, but that's a topic for another day. When it comes to the Spurs, part of me thinks it's a classic. We're a veteran team. We know who we are, and we're playing down to our competition. And if you look, they've lost 14 games this season to sub 500 teams. 14. Now, for a Spurs team led by Greg Popovich, somebody who always is known to get their players in position to play and be successful, losing 14 games is, that is concerning. They're playing down to the level of competition, which kind of goes back to your theory that in the playoffs they're going to get it together. And I think that the players themselves realize that hey, we know what we're doing right now. We know we have to improve upon it. But I don't know if this is going to change for the rest of the season. Their only game against a playoff team is against Denver in the rest of the schedule. So do we see the Spurs get focused as they head into the postseason? Remains to be seen. These last few games, they haven't been playing playoff teams, and they've struggled. Against a Sacramento team that is going to push the pace in transition, if you're not getting back defensively, if you're allowing them to get to their free throw line, if you're allowing them to kind of attack you in the first 6 seconds of the shot clock, you're not going to be successful. And we've seen that. And so I really don't know what's going on, but I have a feeling it has to do a lot more with just playing down to the level of competition.
Yeah, and I just think this is just a really weird time of year. It's one of those things where we've seen Memphis reel off wins, and play a lot of teams tough. Not last night at the Clipper game I was at, but we've seen them play a lot of teams tough, and this is just like kind of you get a lot of fluky results of like, oh, the Suns beat somebody, oh wow, or oh, the Knicks got what, you're kind of just a little bit surprised by it. Well, not the Knicks. The Knicks don't win games this year. But there's always been a couple of like fluky wins at this point, where a really good team is blows a game against a bad team. And the funny thing you said, they've lost 14 games against the sub 500 teams. These are the games. This is why they were always a 50-win team for however many years it was, until the streak ended. Is because they always won those games. They always beat the crap out of the dumb teams. Is the way is the way I would put it. The teams that we were just like, we have no idea what this team looks like, this or that. And then this year, I think there's smarter teams out there, kind of like you said. Sacramento's pushing the pace and playing at a pace that's much more suitable for them, and they're able to make things happen. And that really challenged them last night. But I think there's just less dumb teams out there. There are less teams out there, but the fact is, even though they're still losing to those teams, it's hurting them. But for me, again, like I just think I didn't have them in the playoffs at the start of the year, and that's a big problem for me, being a part of the Spurs alum. For me to go against the family, that's kind of some Michael Corleone kind of stuff. It's sort of trouble. So for me, I didn't have them in the playoffs. So again, them, doing all this with the year, the first year without Kawhi Leonard, which, and then DeJounte Murray goes down and things like that. I just think this is, for them, it's house money. I'm not picking them to beat Denver in a series. I could just see them giving Denver trouble. San Antonio has been awesome at home and god-awful on the road. And I think that's been the biggest difference for them.
And, I like to look at the shooting from last night as well. When you look at the way they played, they were 1 of 16. And I'm looking at something from B-Ball Index. They were 1 of 16 on field goal attempts outside of 11 feet in the last, basically the second half. I mean, that's really bad. And then when you look at Derek White, who's had to pick up a lot of the offensive slack, he's only averaging around 8 points a game in the last 2 weeks. They're struggling. And for a team that has shot really well from the perimeter, they're only shooting 31%, on three-pointers, when they were second in the league in accuracy for the whole season coming into, this recent stretch. it's concerning. You had all these guys who were knocking down open perimeter shots, playing within the flow of the offenses. Now it's like, okay, if we're gonna not even knock our outside shots down, we're not gonna knock our mid-range shots down. How are we gonna score points to generate these points? You can only get LaMarcus to score so many points. You can only get DeMar to get going so much from the right side of the mid range. But when you look at these guys, are they going to be able to manufacture points consistently? And you have all these guards there, and could it also be missing shots? Could it just be as simple as, because I like to go through a point about the Rockets as well and tie that in. The Rockets at one point, yes, their defense was bad, but as we both know, if you're missing shots, you're going to lose the rebounding battle no matter what, because the opposing team is going to get more chances to secure defensive rebounds. And that's what happened. The Rockets themselves were already small in the stretch without Clint. They were missing shots.
Right.
James Harden's had to go all heroic. And if you're missing shots, you're not going to win basketball games. And what's funny is once they started getting healthy, the spacing got right, they started making shots. Their starting lineup with Eric Gordon, James Harden, and Chris Paul with Clint Capella is 17-4. And that's not by coincidence. That's because they're making shots and because the spacing is there. But with the Spurs, could it just be as simple as they're not making shots, their defense is taking a hit as a result, and all this combined, playing down to the competition, they're not being as successful as they need to? And, with Oklahoma City losing to the team like the Mavericks, and with those two, going head-to-head to see who can finish 7th or 8th, Spurs have an easier schedule. But if they keep playing like this and playing down to the competition, I don't know if they're actually going to get that 7th seed. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's a like you said, it's hard for them to win games when Patty Mills goes 1 for 7 from 3, when Bellinelli goes 2 for 6. They're just not going to win games they need to hit those shots. They're not a high volume 3-point shooter team, but they're an effective 3-point shooting team. So when those guys miss, it's just hard for them to beat anybody. And like you said, I mean, Aldridge had a good game last night. He had 27 and 18. DeRozan had 18, I think. Rudy Gay had 15 or something along those lines. Like, those guys were putting up, pretty good numbers. But when those other guys aren't making shots, like you said, that's a big issue. So, I mean, I'm with you here on the Spurs. Like, I think it's funny you said that they have an easier schedule, but that might be a problem for them playing down to them. I still think they'll ramp up and get it going, and start finding their flow again.
Well, Mo, let me ask you this, because I'm just curious on how it worked in San Antonio. Whenever you just mentioned to me a few minutes ago that when it came to them winning these 50 win seasons consistently, it's because they took care of business. I mean, obviously, from an outside perspective now, but what did Coach Pop and the coaching staff do to ensure their players took these games seriously, to ensure that they did get those blowouts that we were so accustomed to seeing? What do you think is different from back then to what it is going on right now?
I don't think the honest truth, dude, is the talent. I mean, back then we had Tim, Manu, and Tony. I mean, it's kind of that easy. And this is a younger team than Pop's used to coaching. We talked about Derek White. Bryn Forbes is another guy who's relatively young. Jakob Podol is another guy who's a young guy who's been really good for them once they started playing. I mean, I don't know if he's their best defensive player, but I think his on-off numbers were pretty staggering when I looked at it a while back. I think it's just a matter of, they had more talent last year, and there were more bad teams. And this year there are smarter teams. Sacramento's not going to make the playoffs, but they're still a pretty tough team. Minnesota's coming on strong here down the stretch with the way Karl Anthony Towns is playing. So I think there's a kind of a level of that. The thing about the Spurs is, you said it from the beginning, they always execute. And I think that's just kind of the stuff. And right now we're seeing them slumping a bit. And I think that might be more where the problems lie. And we could see them break out of it. I mean, I don't think people understand how weird it is these last few games of the season, especially when you've clinched, you're fighting for seeding, but you're also kind of looking ahead to who do you want to play in the first round. Oklahoma City's definitely not going to want to play Golden State, and neither is San Antonio. So they're going to fight to try their best to to stay out of the 8 seed. So it's going to be it's just going to be a weird situation in that sense. And the Spurs blew an opportunity last night. If they beat the Kings with OKC losing to Dallas, they have a chance to be up a game on those guys and kind of have a little bit of a cushion. And you can talk about it vice versa the other way around with OKC blowing the game against Dallas. I think it's just one of those things. It's going to be a challenge, but to your question, I just think they had more talent last time. During those runs when they would beat up on those teams, Tim was a big part of that.
One last thing about the Spurs, I guess, and then we can talk about like Dallas and Houston. But I really liked, especially when they were going on this winning streak, mixing in the zone defense. Because when they played the Rockets about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I forgot when it was, James went off that 13-0 run to end the game. But before that, they made it so difficult on him. And I think besides the Bucks, they've done a pretty good job against James this season. They were mixing in zone. They were mixing in all these different coverage. And I think when you're playing James Harden, he's such a smart guy. People don't realize how much of a genius he is in pick and roll. I mean, we talk about being able to make reads and be able to make passes as a benchmark for guys entering the league. But when you're a guy like James Harden who's mastered how to read a low man and who's mastered how to read the weak side and make his decision, I mean, you have to be able to throw different covers at him. And the Spurs did that. And I don't know, Mo, do you think the zone defense, I'm just kind of prefacing it that way, is making a comeback in the NBA? And do you think the Spurs, and I know that he and other teams have done it, do you think the zone defense could be something that teams go to, especially next season, as we've seen a renaissance of it this season?
I think we'll see more of it, and I think the smartest way to use it is just kind of pick your spots kind of thing. I actually had a conversation with somebody last night about this. If I'm a coach, I would never run a zone defense in the first half. Offenses aren't used to seeing it, but if I run a bunch of zone in the first half, you're going to be able to go into halftime and make adjustments and pick that apart. I'd rather run it in the second half and in spots, 5 possessions or so, and then switch it back up and play it around that way, and continue to kind of keep the offense guessing. I think we will see more zone. I think that's something a lot of teams have been doing it. Not a lot of teams have been doing it well. And I think it's just something we're going to see coaches experiment with. It's interesting now when you look at it this way. The way a lot of people view playing the NBA game offensively is let's get threes and layups. Very much the Houston attitude, and they're not going to give up. They're not going to take mid-range shots for the most part. For a zone, cool. You just set up a zone to run those dudes off the line and meet them at the rim. We're going to talk about it, I'm sure, when we get to Houston about how the Bucks defended Harden. But, at no point did it cross his mind at any point to pull up for a mid-range jumper when he would have had an easy shot. And I think that's something we're going to start to see with zones and coaches kind of experiment. And, we've seen the offensive game take a leap, and now, the defense is going to catch up at some point, and that might be zones. It might be a different configuration than we're used to or seeing. It won't be a true zone, just the way the rules are set up, but it's going to be an interesting one. I think it's something we'll start to see more of next year.
Yeah, and to that point, the mathematical advantage is such a big topic of conversation in league circles. When I talk to scouts, that's one thing that always comes up is, okay, we're in the era of shooting threes. Last season, for example, with Houston, they would kind of bait teams into posting up their guards, and that was their way of having a mathematical advantage. Okay, we're going to shoot a big volume of threes, but if we get you to bait you inside and post up our smalls who are really good at defending bigs, we're going to, you may score 50% of the time in the post and get 2 points, but we may score threes 35, 40% of the time and outscore you and beat you that way. And that mathematical advantage and that thinking came into play, and we're seeing that more this season, where teams are now shooting a lot more number of threes, but at the same time, as to combat it, the zone is coming in, like you talked about, and then they're having to take those mid-range shots which they're not used to. That kind of destroys the rhythm of an offense. And I completely agree. I think if you put this in the the latter half of the third quarter, early part of the fourth, just to disrupt the team, put them off balance, that's something that I really feel like that could be successful. And one more thing with that as well, not just with zones, teams are sending a second guy from the weak side at guys like James, at guys like LeBron, people like that who are dominant with the ball. And it's really making the other four guys on the floor who are oftentimes just shooters be facilitators. And I think we're going to see that a lot more in the playoffs where just get the ball out of the primary guy's hands. For example, if you're playing Denver, get the ball out of Jokic's hands, put him in Murray. He can make a shot, yes, he can. But at the same time, you're making the other four guys be decision makers. And I think ultimately every single defensive team will take that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You just, make the guys who aren't used to scoring have to score or make the play. And take it out of Harden's hands, or for the Spurs, you're going to take it out of DeRozan's hands and Aldridge's hands, and let's see if Jakob Poeltl can really make plays. Let's see how good Derek White is going to be in the playoffs when it's a big change. But I think that's about enough Spurs talk.
Yeah.
We're good on them. So where do you want to go next? You tell me, Dallas or Houston?
Let's go to the second best city in Texas, Dallas.
Dallas.
And then we'll end with we'll end with the best city in Texas. No,
Austin? Austin's got a team?
Austin's the best. No, honestly, Austin is the best city in Texas. I was there for 4 years, man. If anybody listening right now ever has a chance to come to Texas, I highly recommend you just go to Austin. Don't go anywhere else and have the time of your life. It's fantastic. You can do so many great things. I mean, I was there for 4 years, and I still didn't get to do everything I wanted to do. But I mean, that's an aside. But yeah, let's talk about the Dallas Mavericks, who, man, do they have a bright future, Mo?
I mean, first off, after that thrilling ad read for Austin Tourism Board that you just gave, Ali, you're right though. I mean, Dallas does. I mean, first off, I love Luka Doncic. I love that dude. I've been a fan of his from his European days. I was shocked I was shocked he wasn't the number one pick. I'm not mad at Atlanta for making the trade. I think it was a smart play on their part, assuming this pick conveys this year and it's a top 5 pick, or it's top 5 protected, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So basically, with Atlanta winning yesterday and the Dallas also winning, they're still 2 games apart from each other. So as of right now, it'll still be conveyed.
Right, and so I'm not, and who knows what Trae Young is going to be? That's another podcast for another day. But I mean, the future's really bright with what they got going there. They have him balling. Porzingis when he gets back healthy, I think is going to be it's going to be a really fun running mate with him. I know we all want Dirk to retire, but he hasn't announced it. I wouldn't be surprised if he's like, I just want to hang around one more year.
You're not the first person to bring that up, and the more I think about it, Mo, I really feel like he's going to come back. I don't think he himself knows if he's coming back or not, and it's just funny to see people in the NBA kind of, I wouldn't say forcing him, but kind of like, hey, come on, man, it's time to go, Dirk. Come on, Dirk, it's time to go. And even I was in Dallas, and I'm taking one of the big highways, and I'm driving down, and I see one of the billboards, and it has that Dirk, the thing they're marketing right now is like 41, 21, and 1. And the amount of theories that exist on the internet about 41, 21, and 1, I mean, the Mavericks are kind of inviting all this to happen. I mean, the Mavericks are kind of pushing this narrative to also exist.
Well, I mean, it's actually, I'll actually throw it back to the Spurs there. This is kind of what happened with Manu a year before he retired. He finished playing the season, and he's like, it's like everybody else wants me to retire. I don't know if I'm retiring yet. And he came back the next year, and then retired. But it's sort of that same thing where they're kind of pushing Dirk out the door already, and Dirk's like, no, hold on. It's like he's holding on to the door frame, like, no, I'm not ready yet. So it's an interesting sort of dynamic that we've seen going on, and and him playing with Dwayne Wade when they played in Miami, it was almost like, all right, we're both going out. And I'm like, well, no, Wade announced he's leaving. Dirk hasn't yet. So I'm interested. I mean, we've seen him run around. It's not pretty from what we've seen. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him come back. And this is again a young group. They have another guy who I absolutely love is Jalen Brunson. He just impacts the game in many different ways. Makes a lot of defensive plays. He's always kind of in the right spot, hustles. I'm sure I'll take some flack for this, but to me he's like almost like a Malcolm Brogdon light, just not nearly as good of a shooter as Brogdon. But I just feel like a real smart, tough guy, the kind of guy like you want on your team. And I just think they got a couple of good pieces, and they're going to have a crap ton of money this year. Like it's going to be a real interesting offseason for them.
I was talking to some of the Maps guys about this. I don't think he's going to become JJ Barea, because JJ Barea is one of the most unique players in my mind that I've had a chance to watch in my basketball life. Because of how at that size, but with that IQ, basketball IQ, he's able to dominate second units and kind of make an impact on the game. But Brunson, he just has this natural feel. And I think what's important for young guys, Mo, coming into the NBA is that, yes, you have skills. Yes, you have to be able to read defenses, but you have to play your role. If you know your role and you're excited about playing that role, you're going to be successful. What I like about Brunson, he's effective as a guy who can run pick and roll, and he can be a spot-up shooter, but at the same time, he knows his role, playing off of the primary guy in Luka Doncic. And when you have that kind of caliber player on your team, not because he's a superstar, not because he's that, but he can be an effective role player, sign me up for those guys any day of the week. And I really like the way Jalen Brunson plays. Defensively, I don't think he's a guy whose wingspan or things like that is going to pop out at you. But the way he thinks about the game, where he kind of, forces issues to happen. I know there was a game during March when the Rockets played in Dallas, and he had a whale of a game, man. He did really well. I mean, Chris Paul blocked him late, kind of stole how well Jalen played that game. But defensively, he gave Chris Paul fits a little bit. He gave James Harden fits a little bit. And I really do feel like that he's going to be somebody who, I don't know if he's going to close games for them in the future, but is somebody who I really do feel like can slide into that JJ Barea role of being that key cog off the bench and supplying the energy and the dual playmaking and shooting needed for a second unit in today's NBA.
So yeah, I think Jalen Brunson is just kind of a perfect complement for Doncic. I think he's kind of that toughness. He's not the long defender we would hope for or something like that. But I just think, like you said, he's got the smarts, man. He knows where to be. He's got the IQ, and you just kind of love those guys. And he actually, I was looking up his numbers while you were talking, and he shoots better from three than I actually thought. I thought he was a kind of a 33% shooter or below, and that's the that's kind of the cusp. He's 36% 3-point shooter right now. I think he's going to get better. Not much better. He's not going to be a star or anything, but I just think he's a perfect role player, like you said. Perfect kind of cog to kind of put in and help kind of keep that team going.
I like to think of him not as a Patrick Beverley compliment, not like Patrick's intensity and the way he plays defensively. Although, I mean, who knows? Brunson can get to that level of intensity, but the way that he can complement as a starting point guard next to another primary guard, and make an impact as a secondary ball handler, I really do feel like that Brunson provides that. And I already think Brunson's better than Beverley was when he played with Harden as a secondary guy. He's averaging 4 to 5 assists a game as a secondary guy. I mean, that's incredible. That's great for them. And I really do think that as he continues to get these minutes with a second unit, he's going to continue to help them push the pace. I mean, we saw how well he played yesterday against Oklahoma City. I'm in agreement with you. I really do like Jalen Brunson. I really do like his future with Dallas.
I'm going to push back a little bit on him and Beverley, just because Beverley's a different level of defender. Patrick Beverley defensively is a beast. Like when when he sees the target, he's going to crush him. I don't think Brunson can get to that level. I think Beverly's got a good level of length with him. He's got. I'm going to push back on that, but I think as a ball handler and what he can do in the secondary unit, I think is helpful. I think he's going to be a good defender, kind of smart on the rotations and knowing where to go, knowing where to be. and kind of developing from that.
No, I should clarify. I no disrespect to Pat. Pat's probably one of my all-time favorite
You
players.
don't want him coming at you, man. You know
Yeah,
you've dealt with him in Houston.
yeah. I've covered him, and Pat's probably one of the nicest guys. He was one of the first people that I ever got a chance to interview, and he was very nice to me. So Pat, I have a very soft spot for Pat Beverly, and I always respect him. I meant more so than the capacity, like you talked about, where it was the ball handling ability.
Okay.
I really feel that in terms of it's a skill. I think it's a skill definitely to understand your role and play and be able to complement a primary ball handler. And I really do feel like Brunson fits in that kind of role of how Beverly played with Harden. That's kind of all I'm trying to say. And defensively, yes, Beverly is just his own human being, man. He's his own animal. But no, I really do think Brunson can get to that kind of level where he can complement. And even, you know what? Hopefully he can get to that level of playing with Barea, because as we know, Bray is such a key cog for what Carlisle wants to do offensively. And if Brunson can slowly continue to learn from him and kind of get to that point, that's going to be huge for a team that has invested so much in two big stars and is going to have to complement those guys with pieces of lesser salary.
Yeah, and I think there's a level of just with what Brunson can bring, and this is a lot of talk on Brunson. We're really burying the lead on Doncic, Rookie of the Year. But at least he's my Rookie of the Year. But I just think Brunson just kind of adds a nice element to that squad. And he's the kind of guy you do want. He's the kind of guy that brings you winning. He makes winning plays, which is something that's big. And if you sleep on him, he'll hit that shot. Doncic will find him and whatnot.
I'm going to push back on you, by the way, Mo.
Okay, go for it.
You said Luka's Rookie of the Year. You know what? I think Trae Young is Rookie of the Year.
I have let's go. Let's do it.
And this is tough. I don't, part of me, I have a conflicting argument even within myself, because I love watching Luka play. I watch a lot of Mavericks games, man. I really do. And I really love the way Luka can see things. There was a game in November or December when the Rockets played the Mavs in Dallas, and the Rockets were up by like 5 or 6 late in the fourth, and Luka just went off and had like his own 11-0 run pretty much, and he single-handedly won the Mavericks that game, even defensively. And I saw the potential, and I'm like, this guy's a rookie? Are you serious? This guy's not a rookie. He plays like he's an all-NBA kind of guy at some points in time. But then when you look at the way Trae Young plays, when the ball is in his hands, the way he's so methodical and the way he's running his offense, I feel like he needs to get more love than he is. And I know that Luka is likely going to be the Rookie of the Year, but put some respect on Trae Young. Put some respect on how of an elite level of ball handler he is. His passing is incredible. For a guy of his size, of his age, of the personnel he's playing with, I mean, it's incredible the way he is. And I really do feel like that in the future you're going to have him as a guy who's spotting up from 35 feet out, and defenses are going to start to trap him much higher, and he's able to make those passes to the rim with ease, even at 35 feet out when people trap him. I mean, his skill at this age is fantastic. I watched a lot of him when he played at Oklahoma because I was at UT Austin, and obviously Texas and Oklahoma are rivals, and I had a very close eye on Trae, and I think he's great. I mean, if I know a lot of people are going to, knock me for this and say Luka. I love Luka. All right, I love Luka. I watch a lot of Mavericks games, guys. But I do have to say that you have to put some respect on Trae Young and see that he's doing a phenomenal job with Atlanta.
Yeah, there's no disrespect in that. Be saying Luka's the Rookie of the Year. It's not downplaying Trae Young's year. I mean, he started very slowly, shot poorly in November. I think like 20-something% from three, but his passing skills are always something that I've always loved about Young. And I said, listen, he's always going to be able to make those passes and find guys and things like that. And we saw it last night where he hit the game winner in a very weird game against.
But see, look, I will say this about the shooting thing, right? Like we I'm guilty of this too. I will bring that up in conversation about Rookie of the Year and say Trae, started poorly in terms of shooting. But you look at Doncic's number. Luka's shooting not that well from three in the month of March. He was shooting at 24% from three at one point. And before that, he was shooting, I think, 31% in January. he's also struggled a little bit as well. But no, I'm not like taking anything away from your argument. I'm just saying that we speak so highly of Luka, and deservedly so. He is clearly a fantastic player, but we need to also have that. I'm not saying this at you. I'm framing this like
Yeah.
in general to the NBA public. Like, we need to give respect to the things Trae Young is doing, and that's not saying Trae Young is bona fide, crazy, awesome player yet. He has a ways to go to improve defensively. Teams will pick on him. The Rockets just attacked him in double high screens to get him involved on switches. And Atlanta had to make up for it so much. Like, he needs to get better defensively. But if you look at what he's doing offensively for Atlanta, that merits a very high accomplishment. And honestly, if it was a perfect world, ideal world, give both of them Rookie of the Year. Make them co-Rookie of the Year, because both of them have played phenomenal.
I mean, they both have a case. There's no question. It's not open and shut, guaranteed one way or the other. I think there's a level of, I think Trae Young's a better passer than Luka. I think Luka is obviously a better rebounder and things like that. I think Luka has they both impact the game just differently. And for me, I just look at it and I think Luka's been the Rookie of the Year to me. That's just the way I look at it. It's not a slight on that. And Trae's been getting a lot of pub over the past month. You're not the first person to scream, hey, we're not talking about Trae Young enough. So I think that's I think he's beginning to get that recognition. And listen,
for sure.
Here's the other thing. That Atlanta team's going to be a lot of fun for years to come with him, John Collins, Herder, if it gets going. I think that's going to be a squad. And if they find a way to get Zion on that number one pick,
oh my God, I'm joining the bandwagon. I'm becoming president, CEO, CFO, everything of the Atlanta Hawks. We're gonna get going on that.
Yeah, it's gonna be an adventure. So it's gonna be but that's a big if. And again, not another podcast, another time we could talk. We'll talk about it in July if that stuff goes down. I do want to get to the Rockets because that's the team you cover the most, right? That's the team you're around constantly.
Yes.
Give it to me straight, man. What can this Rockets team do? Can they beat the Warriors?
I talk to Kelly about this all the time. Kelly Eco, who also covers the Rockets for The Athletic. The team the Rockets get up to play the most. The team the Rockets are motivated to beat. They're not going to say it. Daryl Morey has said it before, but they're not going to say it. You can tell there's a feeling in the Rockets locker room every time they play the Warriors. They want to whoop their butt. And I really feel like if the matchup came in the postseason, the Rockets have a very good shot at defeating this Warriors team. Are the Rockets the same team as they were last season? No. But are the Warriors the same team as they were last season? I don't think so. And when you put those two things together, the way those two teams knew each other really well, our friend Matt Moore, last time the Rockets played the Warriors, came out and said, the Warriors just seemingly forget how to play against switches when the way they play the Rockets. And I completely agree. All the Rockets do is switch, force Durant to post up on the right or left side, create a great wall of Houston on the weak side, take away all the shooters, and force him to play a one-on-one. And the way PJ Tucker has really played well defensively against Durant, the Rockets will take that 10 out of 10 times because they have so much confidence in the way Tucker plays. So to answer your question, yes, I think if the Rockets play the Warriors in the postseason, it would be a very tough series. I think it'll go to 7 games. But I do see the Rockets edging them out. The only question is the Rockets would not have home court advantage this time around. Oracle is a dangerous place to play. But the Rockets will be the first ones to tell you they played there so many times these last 2 years, it doesn't matter where they play anymore.
That is quite a take, Ali. I don't think there's a chance. I don't think they have the defensive level that they had. I mean, we know they're not as good a defensive team as they were last year. I don't even think we've seen the best of the Warriors and the way they could play. I think they've sleptwalked through the regular season. I think they're just kind of there. And then the Warriors showed up the last time they played and they whooped on them. I just don't think the Rockets have it defensively to really have to take all that on. And then the other aspect behind it, and this is something I do want to talk to you about because you post some great stuff on video. My thing with the Rockets is they tend to get lost into and tunnel vision and stuck in this isolation James stuff. And as great as he is, and there's no question about it, he's freaking phenomenal. I think they really don't use everybody as well as they could. You've shown like when they run some sets and some actions out of it, they can find a easy lob for Capella. They can work it through and get the ball to Paul and let Harden kind of move around the screen, and get him off the ball and then back on and things like that. And there's a lot of different opportunities. I mean, Mike D'Antoni is one of the most creative coaches we've had in the NBA, and I feel like he just doesn't really show us the stuff anymore. Like, he has great stuff with his pistol action 21 series and all of those things, and I don't think they run that stuff enough. And I think just running into a high pick and roll with James Harden it's for a good defensive team. It's easy to defend. We saw what the Bucks did. I wrote about it for the Washington Post of them just forcing him right. And that only works really when you have a guy like Brook Lopez who could defend at the rim, and then you have the weak side rotating behind it, which is what they did. They had Giannis coming in from behind and taking away any real Capella roles. And I think that kind of put a lot of pressure on that squad. And I think that's the kind of stuff that Golden State can do. I mean, they're when they want to be. I mean, we haven't seen it this year just because they've sleptwalked through the regular season and they're fighting for the 1 seed. I think it's interesting that you think that they can that you think Houston can beat them, just because I just don't think they have the defensive power, and I don't think they have I don't think they're going to go to being very creative offensively, which plays into the Warriors' hands defensively.
To your point, defensively, I completely agree. The Rockets had their best defensive month of the season here in March. They were second best defensive rating. But in the playoffs, that's obviously different. I think where this Rockets team differs the most is people will tell me, oh, well, Ariza could have fixed this. They should have signed Ariza again. Yes, Ariza is a lengthy body, but Ariza is not the reason why the Rockets are struggling defensively this season. It's just overall they've gone smaller as a basketball team. Look at their starting lineup, Mo. You got Chris Paul. You got James Harden. You got Eric Gordon. That's 3 guards right there. 3 smalls. That's Coach D'Antoni refers them to. Then you got PJ Tucker and you got Clint Capella. They're not switching as much anymore because they can't rebound from the weak side. And so what they're having to do is any 1-5 pick and roll that's involved, the only time they'll switch is if it's James and Clint. If it's Clint and Chris, they're not switching. If it's Clint and PJ, switch maybe 60% of the time. But more times than not, they're going to keep Clint at the rim to secure those defensive rebounds. And even then, they're struggling to just be below the rebounding battle in terms of losing it or just above it and winning. And that's been the biggest difference for me, is that they have a much smaller – they have smaller personnel. And in the playoffs, when you're playing all these different teams, having that smaller personnel is an advantage in some situations. Against the Bucks, it can be an advantage offensively if you guys make shots. And I talked to one of the Rockets coaches, and I brought up the points you made in that piece you wrote for the Washington Post on how the Rockets struggled against the Bucks defense. And he told me, well, PJ Tucker, Eric Gordon combined to go, I think it was 1-9, Mo. Do you remember? It was 1-9 or 1-11 from 3?
Something like that.
Yeah. And he was like, well, they missed open shots. And my kind of takeaway from that was they still seem pretty confident that they know how to play against that style of offense. I mean, it didn't seem like it. Yes, they did miss some shots, but, I think a big culprit of it is that they're smaller. And if they're smaller, it makes it tougher. Last season, they had a lot more versatility in the lineups they could play. We saw so many times so they had 3 guys, Mo, as you know. They had PJ, Luke, and Trevor. Interchangeable, 2 guys on the court at all times. When Luke went out, obviously that changed. It was more Eric Gordon sliding into that Luke role because he couldn't shoot the basketball. You had Gerald Green play a lot more minutes in the Western Conference Finals. But for most of the regular season, it was Luke, it was Trevor, and it was PJ. And they would have 2 of them on the court with James and Chris and possibly Clint or Eric at all times. Small ball lineup, to the extreme. This season, their small ball lineups have not been as successful. Coach D'Antoni has talked to us about possibly using PJ Moore at the 5 because now that they have Daniel House back and he's been shooting pretty well on spot ups, that you can kind of do that. But I personally haven't seen enough positive instances of them going to a small ball lineup and being successful, especially defensively, to merit that in the playoffs. Maybe they're saving that as their lineup to go to in the playoffs, but that to me is probably one of the biggest things that has not been discussed about the Rockets. Yes, things have changed, but when you look at their personnel this season, it's different. You rely on I'll give you the best example that illustrates this. When the Rockets play Toronto, obviously Pascal Siakam is a big front line. You play with Ibaka, you can play him with Pascal, Ibaka, and Marc Gasol together if you really wanted to. If you do that, Pascal becomes a 3. Who was defending Pascal Siakam when the Rockets played them twice this season? Take a guess.
It was Harden, right? Or what was who did they have him on?
They're one of their smallest guards on them, Austin Rivers.
Okay.
And now you're like, okay, I mean, what's the reason behind it? Well, Austin Rivers is one of the best on-ball defenders in the league. So that makes sense. But even then, you have him versus last season, you had a guy like PJ, Luke, or Trevor to put on him, right? In terms of the length, in terms of all those things. So you can seamlessly switch everything and not worry about defensive rebounding. This season, you have a small on him already. And that already puts you at a disadvantage when it comes to grabbing that defensive board. So for me, that's the big issue.
I'm going to take umbrage. Austin Rivers is not one of the best on-ball defenders in the league.
Statistically.
I mean, listen, that's the same as him saying that, and then Steph Curry blowing right by him. That's not he's not. Austin Rivers is overrated as a player defensively. That's my opinion of him. I think he does a good job on the offensive end, driving to the hole and making things happen. Defensively, I don't think he's that great. I don't think he's terrible. I don't think he's horrible or anything. But I think the Austin Rivers is a great on-ball defender. I mean, I've seen a good number of him here with the Clippers. That's a nice narrative that everybody's pushing that I just don't think is true in that sense. I honestly just don't think this team. I really wish they were more creative offensively, because I think that opens things up. And the coach talking about PJ Tucker and Eric Gordon didn't shoot well. Well, hell, y'all didn't shoot well in Game 7 either. It's not one of those things. Those are the guys I will live with. I will happily lose a series if those are the guys that have to hit shots. It's like we talked about earlier, right? I'm fine as long as it's not James Harden's the one who's getting all these looks. Well,
that's what teams are doing, Mo. They are literally just doubling him at the top of the key with 7 seconds on the shot clock. And all right, we're taking the ball out of your hands. PJ, go make a shot. Eric, go do something. And I have asked Coach D'Antoni, hey, have you been happy with the way the team is doing against traps and stuff like that? And personally, I know you watched the film too. They haven't done that well of a job. They have some games where Capella's been good on the short rolls. They have some games where PJ's able to execute and knock down the corner 3. But I've seen a good amount of footage myself where it's like they are struggling when teams just straight up double James at the top, force the ball out of his hands, and make somebody else make shots. And that's kind of lost their offensive rhythm. But I think these quick hitter actions where you have Chris Paul bringing the ball up and getting into the action in 21 series, 19 seconds in the shot clock, that's what we need to see more. And I think ultimately their success in the postseason is going to be based off of how quick are they able to get into those shots. Because obviously their pace of play is very biased, in my opinion, when it comes to how much isolation they play. They do play fast. They've played faster than they have last season, actually, when you even consider how much isolation they've done. But, these isolations that we've been seeing from James, I'll give you – I'm not saying I agree with this, Mo, but I'll give you their perspective on it. When you look at all the plays they run, you have a mathematical points per possession that you can get out of it. Okay, if we run 21 Nash, blah, 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 we can get 1.1 points per possession. If we run this, we run our delay action, we get this. All these different actions they run, they probably have a points per possession. When you look at James Harden in isolation and the way and the frequency he's playing it with and how much he's converting, the points per possession is very good. So if they can ever get a mismatch of James Harden being defended by any sort of big, they're going to wave off the offensive action and give him the ball. And the best example of this is Chris Paul, a guy who wants to get the ball inbounds very fast, will yield the basketball to James Harden anytime that mismatch occurs. So I agree with you, Mo. I think that they do need more flexibility. We've seen that. I think Coach D'Antoni has sprinkled in some very clever sets. I've talked to the coaches about it. There are some very clever things they've added in. It's on film. It's going to come up in the postseason. They're definitely going to run it, but we need to see it more. And I think I agree with you there that unless they start doing that, they have a little bit the last few games. They're kind of getting Eric Gordon more involved on the ball, and they're kind of putting him in a little Ryan Anderson type of role where the gravity is going a little bit more outside the perimeter to 28 feet out. But we need to see that more, especially in that first round, for me to buy in fully to this team, not just getting out of the Western Conference, but possibly beating an Eastern Conference team. And as we both know, that Eastern Conference is not a joke this year.
Yeah, no, the Eastern Conference is good this year, and you know they'd have problems if it was Milwaukee in the finals if they got that far. I don't think they're getting past Golden State. I'm with you though. They need to be willing to show a little more balance in how much isolations. I know they have a higher points per possessions with James's isolation stuff, and they should be able to go to that when they can. But I also think it's a matter of giving James a little more rest, and if somebody else kind of carries the load and running those actions and things like that. I mean, you had a great clip where they ran, it was like a 21 delay series, and into a double high pick and roll, and found Capella for a lob. I mean, like just running into that kind of stuff on a regular basis, or mixing that stuff in more often. But you know, like when I watched that Bucks game, I mean, that thing was it really felt like they didn't run a single play but high pick and roll. Anytime James was in the game, it was high pick and roll, and just like banging their heads on the wall. It wasn't working, but they just kept doing it because they thought eventually it will. And it didn't. And I think that's kind of going to be their problem and their downfall.
Well, Mo, when it comes to that defense and the way teams, like the way the Bucks play them, what are some actions you feel like would be successful for them against that team? Because the way Bucks were defending them, they're taking away the left hand. They're forcing him to go right. I personally think that if you run more hammers, if you can run a little bit, if you can sprinkle on a little hammer, if you can sprinkle in little things like that, where you're forcing him to go sideline and he can pass going left to right or right to left, I think that's ultimately things you have to consider. Okay, they're shading his left. Okay, let's let James go right, but let's have something set up on the weak side where there can be a catch and shoot three, because they're basically overloading him with Giannis as Defensive Player of the Year camped out in the paint.
Yeah,
as the weak side guy rotating. You need to have a counter for that. And I really do think that hammer or these other flare screens on the opposite side are completely necessary. But what are some sets you feel like would be successful that the Rockets should maybe implement?
I mean, anything that gets him off the ball and then have him run his defender off a screen or two and then get him the ball back. I know he's not he's not an off the screen shooter. He's not running off screens. He's not Steph Curry going to come off a screen, a pin down and drill it. But just give him enough of a chance to give him enough of a room to get to his left, and rub a guy off a screen, or handoff actions, and make sure you nail his guy with the screen and things like that. I think they just need to be able to get him off the ball just a little bit and then get him back.
Where this hurts? This also hurts with Chris Paul. Chris Paul, I mean, he's had flashes, Mo, where he will attack a guy off the dribble. He'll score in isolation. He does those things. But against the Bucks for a whole series, can we trust Chris Paul to run a 1-2 pick and roll with James Harden? Because I think that would be an ideal set for them to run against the Bucks. Can he run a 1-2 pick and roll with James Harden? Let James either get a switch on a small, or can Chris Paul beat the guy off the dribble and score consistently? And if he can't do that, the Rockets can't win. And I think that said, if they ran that last season against this Bucks team, with the way Chris Paul played in isolation last season before the hamstring injury, I mean, the Rockets have a really good shot.
Yeah.
But unless that Chris Paul from last year comes in and plays isolation this season, I don't know, because I really do feel like the 1-2 pick and roll, which has been their go-to play, especially late in games, can be successful. But can we trust Chris Paul to do it consistently enough?
I don't think we're gonna see. We're watching Chris kind of go down this way. I don't think he can do what he did last year. He'll have flashes. He'll have a game or two. I don't think he could do what he did all series, for an entire series like he did against Golden State before he hurt his hamstring. The other thing too is, I mean, you know better than me. I haven't seen a lot of 1-2 pick and rolls. Have they been running that much?
To close the first half and in the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter, that will be something they go to. It used to be predominantly just James and Chris, but now with Eric shooting really well here in March, they've been doing a lot of James and Eric pick and rolls. And the thing with Eric is he can attack off the dribble and use his little quick first step to use, and then finish it with his left shoulder. But yeah, that's been something they've been trying to go to a little bit more, especially here in March.
So, I mean, it's going to be an interesting thing to see how they divvy this up and how they react to how teams will defend them. I think they're going to see an assortment of different defenses. I think teams are going to throw the kitchen sink at them, because the other thing too, and this is the important thing to note, Harden is going to get his. He's a hell of a scorer. Like, he's going to find a way. It's a question of how efficient he does it, and if you can really there's no really stopping him. It's, can you slow him down enough to make a difference? Alykhan, I think I've taken up more time than I thought I would. So tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Rockets_insider. Also follow me on Instagram if you have an Instagram. I've been using that a lot more, especially here late in the season, kind of giving some inside videos and things like that. I have a couple good stories coming out very soon that I'm excited to share. You can find my work at The Athletic. Me and Kelly are, trying to produce the best content we can when it comes to the Rockets. A lot of great stories as we get into the postseason. And if you're not a subscriber, I highly encourage you to subscribe. Last season in the postseason, when I first started with The Athletic, I was able to do a lot of really great film studies after every playoff game. Hoping to continue that as well this time around. So if you're looking for anything Rockets, holistic coverage, be sure to follow and subscribe to The Athletic as well. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
Perfect. Alykhan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And that's it for our show. Be sure to rate us, like us, leave reviews on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, wherever else you go to listen to your podcasts. Have a good one.